So, thank you for tuning in again to another edition of Old Testament Study with Hillel and Rick. Not that I do a lot of listening, and I bring up rabbit trails and stuff like that, as we like to call them. But yeah, I hope you're enjoying this. Again, it's another edition of Hillel and Rick. This is episode 5, I believe. On my channel, it's a little different on his, because we've been going as long, slightly longer. It's just because our first week got sort of messed up. So, anyways, I don't know why I'm babbling. Anyways, on with things.
I've noticed. It's about a minute or two. Okay, well, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we're started. So.
Okay, well, I'll just go ahead and start. Hi, I'm Hillel, and this is Rick, and we're going to be learning Genesis 1:7 tonight, and we're going to see how far we get. I do not have great confidence we'll get beyond a couple of verses. I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, well, then I guess we'll have more verses done today. So far, just to give a quick summary of where we've come from, we've done the first 6 verses so far of Genesis, and we've gone from the very beginning act of creation where God created the heaven and the earth from nothing, and then he began to separate. On day 1, he created and made the light and the darkness and separated them from one another. And here we are with day 2, where he's got the waters.
Yeah.
We ended up last week with 1:6 with God gathering the upper waters and the lower waters together, putting out rakia, an expanse between them. And so now we're in Genesis 1:7. So Genesis 1:7 says.
Hello. Before you go on, can you send me a link to that page with the Hebrew stuff?
It's safaria.org.
Okay. Just because it's not letting me go up anywhere in our DMs before, and so I usually just go click it to bring it up. So
It's safari.org, and then you click on
Safaria.
Tanakh.
How's that spelled?
SEFARIA.
SC.
.org. FARIA.
Okay, so
Safaria.
SE. Oh, there we go. Just type in and bring it up. I'm just trying to. I should have done this beforehand. Getting my stuff. Sorry, my bad.
It's okay. You got it?
Yeah.
Okay. So it says.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I was just saying, I want people to be able to see the scripture on my end. So.
Sure. It says, "Vaya as Elokim et harakia hayavdel ben hamayim asher mitachat larakia uvein hamayim asher mehal larakia vehi kain." So it says, and God made the expanse, and he separated between the waters which were under rakia and between the waters which were above the expanse, and it was so. The very first thing that the Ramban points out here is that something a little strange about this. In the past, we always start off with, and God said. And so we understand from when it says, and God said, we understand that actually God is speaking things into the way that he wants it. He's speaking things in one way into existence. Now understand, we've already said something was created from nothing. But here we're saying, and he said, right? So now there is a separate process. Yeah. We're going to be making stuff and forming stuff and separating. It says, and he said, and let me see what I had it written down here. Oh yeah. So it says, by the word of Hashem, the heavens were made. This is Psalms 33:6. There might be a little difference between the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible on how we number verses. Yeah. Like I think that Christian Bibles take the first verse, and they literally sort of almost like a intro, and then the next verse is the first verse. In the Hebrew Bible, we always have the first verse of the psalm as verse 1. But there might be like a 1 or 2 verse difference between them.
Yeah.
So it says, by the word of Hashem, the heavens were made. And so we see here that God keeps saying, Vayomer, and he said, right? He said this in verse 6, Vayomer Elohim Yihi Rakia. He said, God said, let there be an expanse between the waters, and there was it would be a separation between waters to waters. He says, let there be. Thing. Verse 7 then says, Vayas, and he made. Okay, so this is a little bit weird because usually what happens is Vayas and he made is not usually used in the creation count. I think it's used in one other verse later. So the question is, why is this seemingly superfluous phrase being introduced here? Because usually the pattern is, and God said, let there be, and it was so. That's the pattern, right?
Yeah.
Let there be, God said, let there be such and such, and there were such and such. But here it says, let there be such and such. God said, let there be such and such, and God made, and there were such and such. So that's the strange thing that's going on here. So now the Jewish attitude about the Tanakh, or specifically the Torah, the first 5 books, is there's nothing superfluous written.
It's written the way it is for a reason. In other words.
It is, and everything means something. So, for example, there is a command in the Torah not to cook a kid in its mother's milk. That command appears 3 times, and we learn as a practical matter that each of the times it's used, it means something else. But one time it means literally don't cook it in its mother's milk. The other time it has to do with once it's boiling, and the once is doing a different kind of cooking, like don't boil its milk, don't make cheeseburgers, and so it's got like 3 different halakhic implications with it. So each one of those times, even though they're written exactly the same, they have to come to teach us something different. So when we see something odd, when we see a break in a pattern, we know something different is going on.
Yeah.
So this is the question: what does it mean? And he made. We already see from verse 6 that it should be Vayomer, and God said, let there be Rakia. And there was Rakia, right? That's how it should end. God made the Rakia, the expanse. He separated between the waters which were below the expanse. I keep saying Rakia. I'm sorry, I mean expanse.
Yeah.
I just keep reading the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word is Rakia, but the English word is expanse. Like the sort of like I was even kind of like an air bubble, if you will. But we talked about this last week. So if you're confused, go back and watch last week's, and we talk about what the Rakia is exactly. I just want to make clear. I'm talking when I said Rakia, I mean expanse.
Yeah.
So God made the Rakia. He separated between the waters which were below the Rakia and to the waters which were above the Rakia, or the expanse, and it was so. So there's the "and it was so" that we were expecting, and so he asked, what does this mean? Because he says on the first day, the Torah says that there be light, and there was light. Okay, and the phrase, and God said, let there be light, after recording the utterance of God. I'm reading the Ramban right now. Scripture specified that the command was carried out, and it happened as it was decreed. However, after the utterance of let there be a firmament, it is written, God made the firmament and separated. So why does it add, and it was, why does it add, and it was so? It seems like you can either say, and God made, or you can say, and it was so. You don't need both of those phrases. You can take one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
So he says that you can understand this as it was so is necessary, because what it means is God has established something permanently. It's a permanent establishment of that thing.
It's
Now, David,
reality
go
now.
ahead.
It's reality now,
It's
and
fixed.
there's no messing with it.
It's now a natural law, if you will. This is the way it will be from now on. So before this, it wasn't. So let's review what is this? Why is this important? Because when we talked about the first verse, it said, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." We said that word "created" meant something from nothing. Okay, and we called that substance. Ramban used the Greek term "hule," Hule, and he said that term is referring to a certain type of substance that in Hebrew we don't have a word for, so that's why we're using the Greek word. And the Greek word means what we mean in Hebrew when we say when we talk about this substance. And but all of this, the hule is actually just potential. There are two types of potential that were created. One potential is called heaven. The other potential is called earth. Once you get to the days of separating, and he said, let it be called this and let it be called that. So we see prior to verse 3, where it says, God said, let there be light, we actually encountered the idea of darkness, right? Yeah. So we already had darkness. So then why does God then later on go about, and he names, says light is day and darkness is night and yada, yada, yada. Why do we have that? It's because it was so then establishes it as this is what that thing is. And we're using the terms either similar to how they're used from that point on, and we're just taking the definition and then reapplying it backwards, or we understand that there's a difference between the light and darkness from prior to let there be light. Maybe there's a difference there to what we're dealing with now, and also what we're dealing with when we come to day 4, which is when we have the establishment of the sun and the moon and the stars. Mm-hmm. So we're talking from potential is bara, so the hule, which was bara, something from nothing, hule. Vaikan means it was so. It means now this is a fixed thing. Okay, and it is permanent. Mm-hmm. Let's go on to verse 8. Do you have a question yet, or should I move on to verse 8?
Don't think so. I can't think of anything.
Okay.
Well, it's just. Well, I guess I was thinking the expanse could be. Well, I know it's going to say sky here in a second, but could also be space and all that. Part of space, anyways. I guess the sky could the space be considered part of sky in God's eyes?
Well, it's separating between the lower waters and upper waters, and I take that as being the air that separates sort of the upper atmosphere from the the seas and the oceans and everything like that. That's how I'm understanding it.
Uh-huh.
So because we know, I mean, look, we have clouds and precipitation and all that stuff. It's interesting that we discussed before that the rabbis understood that Shemaim, one definition was Shemaim was the water there. But we know when we look at a cloud, there's water there, right? If it's gray, you got gray clouds, it's ready to rain. Another interpretation of Hashemaim, of Shemaim was two words, one being Aish, fire, and Mayim being water, and the heavens are a mixture of fire and water. And we know that whenever we bring we have a meteorite that comes through, bring a spaceship down from outer space, it creates a friction with the atmosphere, and that creates a fire. That's what protects the Earth from extraterrestrial objects from entering. And so the Earth doesn't wind up like the moon, where you have all these giant hits and everything from meteors.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that that there is a mixture of fire and water. It seems like.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking something, but I forget what. Yeah. Anyway,
that's okay. That's all right.
Guess we can.
Go
on.
If you think about it, you can bring up the issue again. Just if you think about it, stop me and we'll see.
I know something about Sort of a question I might have. Would have there been cloud back then though? Um, because
So
from what I get or
I
what I've heard, there might not have been rain. So you know, at that point, there was some sort of mist that came up in the morning or whatever. You know, for Adam and all that, and to keep things watered,
right.
if you will.
But I think the
Because
point of
wasn't
that,
rain just the first time with Noah?
yeah, so according to that theory, that the water is like an extra mist shield. That it's not that it's acting as a second barrier, and with the flood of Noah, that barrier is broken, and then you start having rain clouds and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So I don't know. It could be that. It could be one or both, or either of those things. It
yeah,
depends on how you end up interpreting those verses.
yeah,
Um, but I think that no matter how you interpret those verses, at the end of the day, you still have um, that there was a separation of waters. And even when you talk about the flood of Noah, it talks about that. When we get to that later
yeah,
on, like chapter 6,
yeah,
it'll
uh,
talk about that water being broken.
yeah. I just thought I'd bring it up, with you saying with the clouds and all that,
Sure,
just I think it made sense to bring it up.
of course, yeah, sure. That's what we're
you know,
talking about right now.
a rabbit trail, Well, I'm not sure whether it's
Yeah,
rabbit
you
trail,
can't.
but
Well, it's not really a rabbit trail. It's pretty on point, actually. So I'm still waiting for a rabbit trail. We haven't done a rabbit trail yet. So, and
yeah.
we're already like 15 minutes in the broadcast. So far, no rabbit trails. I find that very interesting. Rick, you're falling down on the job. When are we getting to our rabbit trail?
Well, I'm sure I'll get one sooner or later here.
Right.
Like you said, we're only 15 minutes in.
That's right. We got time. We got time. All right. So the eighth verse, pasuk eight, pasuk eight. So I don't know. You know what? I'll get us started. I'll introduce our first rabbit trail for the evening.
Ooh,
Just to
it's
give
gonna be
us
you, not
context.
me.
That's right. Well, you're not doing your job. I have to step in and do your job for you,
Yeah.
Mr. Rabbit Trail. Okay. So when we talk about the Hebrew words for chapters, parak.
For
The
chapter?
Hebrew word for chapter. We have the Hebrew word for chapter is parak.
Peric?
If I want to read, so right now we're reading parak. We're reading the first parak, the first chapter of Genesis.
Okay.
Now Hebrew letters are interchangeable for numbers. So the aleph is equal to 1, the beta is equal to 2, the gimel is equal to 3, and so forth. And so I would say if I'm talking about Genesis chapter 1, I would say Bereshit, Perak Aleph, right? So
Yeah.
Bereshit, Perak Aleph. Now that if we're talking about a verse, the Hebrew word for verse is pasuk.
Pasuk?
So pasuk.
Uh,
So it would be, if I'm talking about Genesis 1 1, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, I'd say Bereshit, Perak Aleph, Pasuk Aleph. That's
so
how I would refer to it.
Bereshit, Peric, Olive, Olive? Did I say that right?
Perak Aleph, yeah, and Pasuk Aleph.
Pasuk, Olive.
Right, that's Genesis 1 1. That's how we'd say Genesis 1 1
Bereshit,
in Hebrew.
Bereshit.
And I was just bringing this up. Okay.
I just trying to repeat it. Bereshit, Peric,
Bereshit,
Olive, Bereshit, Peric, Olive. Oh, what's that word? Something
Pasuk
Olive.
Aleph.
What Olive?
Pasuk Aleph.
Pasuk Olive?
Pasuk.
Pasuk? Did I say that right? Pasuk?
Pasuk. Pasuk. I guess you could say Pasuk.
Pasuk? Olive?
Yeah.
Nah.
Pasuk Aleph. Right. And so it would be Bereshit, Perak Aleph, Pasuk Aleph. Now we're in verse 8. We're about to start verse 8. The whole reason I went on this rabbit trail was because I caught myself. I was about to say Pasuk Hate. I was telling everybody we're in Pasuk Hate. So the letter Hate is also its numerical value is the number 8. So I would say we are about to go into Bereshit Perak Aleph Pasuk Kate.
Right? Okay. Okay. Just well, I'm just wondering on the off note. I'm not going to go into why, but what's six?
Maybe what I'll try to do from now on, or
What's
whatever, I'll try to go ahead and use the Hebrew words for that. Maybe that you guys can learn it then.
yeah. What's uh the sixth number or letter for six and all that? And then what's the
So
meaning for? Or is there any meaning behind all that stuff? I guess for six.
okay, so a vav is the letter that is represented by six. The number six we have in English.
Above.
Vav, letter vav is
Above.
six, equivalent to the sixth. All right. So our letters can actually be interchangeable. So, rabbit trail. Thank you, Rick. There's a rabbit trail on my rabbit trail. So I'll just tell you, if you go back to Genesis chapter 1, I don't have him here. We have this little thing called gematria. I don't have my gematria rabbi here. But if certain, if you take a word has a value. You add up the value of all the different letters in the word. You have a new word with a new value. That value can make a connection with other words with the same value. So if you take all the words of Bereshit, you add it all together, you get a certain number, and then you could find a connection with another word, and that will broaden the meaning of the verse. This is called gematria, and it's very interesting. But the rule of thumb, the Ramban writes in a separate work, and I forget the name of the work right now. But he says in his separate work, he says that we only trust the gematrias that are already part of the tradition. Like we don't make up new gematrias now.
Yeah.
All the gematrias that we have are things that we passed down through tradition, since Sinai, and those are the ones that we do. We don't do new gematrias. But the gematrias we do have can actually, give us some very interesting insights into what's going on. So the number value is very interesting. And I'll also let you know that the Hebrew, we have different types of number systems in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So in the world today, we use what's called Arabic numerals.
Yeah.
And Arabic numerals, the way they work is they use places. So there's a ones place, a tens place, a hundreds place. That's the way we use math today. But there have always been different systems. So, for example, in the Hebrew Bible is called an additive numerical system, and that means that you just add things up, and that's what the value becomes. So that's the value of it. And so, the 1,000, if you were using like letters to write that, you wouldn't. You use a number to equal that amount. So we've always had letters to represent numbers, and they've been interchangeable. So, but today, almost everybody universally uses Arabic numerals, and we use them too for certain things. But when it comes to reading the Torah, we use letters in the place of numbers. Now, all of this I just explained to you is true on printed editions of the Torah. If you go into a synagogue and you look at the Torah scroll, none of these verses and numbers exist.
Yeah.
The Christians came up with with the dividing of the books into chapters and verses.
Yeah.
And the Jews just adopted it because it was convenient. It was a convenient thing to do.
Yeah, it's a convenient way to remember where or quote where. I believe that's why we came up with it. Because just like the letters of Paul and the New Testament, it wasn't none of this stuff was written with chapters and verses. That came later, just to make it easier to memorize or something like that. I forget what. I know I've heard the reason, but I think that's the reason. Just to it makes it
The way
easier
we
to memorize. End quote.
right,
I think chapter and verse.
you're breaking up a lot tonight. I think you've got an issue on your end with your connectivity.
Uh,
Um, but I'll just say this while you're reestablishing yourself. Um,
yeah,
prior to using these chapter and verse things, and we do this today, we would name different sections. And for example, the section where the Ten Commandments appear, that's called
yeah.
Exodus 20 around there. Excuse me, that parsha is Yitro.
Yeah, you were mentioning that last
So
week, I think, or maybe on a different broadcast that we were with you.
yeah, we talked about that one of the first ones. I think I talked about. There's so much information. I'm revisiting it now to reintroduce it here as
Yeah,
a quick refresher and a reminder. So where we're in the parsha we're in right now is Parshat Parsha Bereshit. Parsha Bereshit is includes I think the first 6 chapters of Genesis, and so we're going to be here for a while probably. But as we go on, I'll let you know when we change parshas. But I just want to let you know that we have this sort of this interesting system that we use. Letters to stand for numbers. They're
yeah,
interchangeable. There's a lot of that stuff that has for giving us different levels and deepening our understanding of the text.
yeah.
But we're doing shot. We're just doing simple learning here. But every
Uh,
now and then I'll try to introduce something that makes your eyes flutter a little bit.
I'm not sure. I gotta find somebody who knows their Hebrew lettering and all that stuff like you to do the New Testament through because I think going through the New Testament like this would be awesome too. Yeah, I know you probably wouldn't be up for that, but
I wouldn't know what to tell you. Like I'm not an expert on the New Testament. It's not something I study. So
yeah. Well, I just more
I mean,
mean
I
I just more mean because what the words mean, and the numbering because this whole numbering system, it's got me
yeah.
thinking of Revelation, and with because the Antichrist who's supposed to come,
Mhm.
he's given and it says the number of his name shall be 666. So there would be so much meaning to that, probably in the Jewish stuff and all that I can't even comprehend at the moment.
Right.
And I would love to
I don't know.
comprehend
Yeah.
had something like
Yeah.
that.
I don't know.
And yeah, like I didn't expect you to know. Like there probably really a lot more meaning, even in the Book of Revelation. You know, and I'm sorry for going off on this rabbit trail. But with the Jewish understanding of things, especially being written to Jewish people. But anyways, I'll get off
Mhm.
that rabbit trail. Just,
Well, I mean, it's interesting what you're saying. I just have nothing to add to it because I don't really
yeah,
know
yeah, I get that.
about it from that standpoint. I mean, I understand that I understand some basics about the New Testament, but I really wouldn't be able to add anything to it. I'd probably just spend my time disagreeing with it. And you'd find me arguing with the New Testament more than anything else. So I don't know how helpful that would be. So, but
Well, the thing is, maybe you could put, I'm not sure whether it's true or not, but maybe you'd put a lot of it more in the Jewish perspective that Christians, I don't think really get because, and well, to a certain degree because these books, most of them were written by Jewish people to first century Jews. We're trying to
mhm.
interpret those books by 20th century American stuff, for 20th century, you know, uh,
Well,
Gentile
it is
people instead of
it
first
is
century
interesting.
Jews. Sorry.
I'll say this much, and that is that Jesus was in the first century CE, right? I think he died in like 33 or 32 or something like that.
Yeah, 33.
Um, yeah, depending on where you start. Yeah, but um, he's in. I talked about the Talmud. The Talmud split up between the Mishnah and the Gemara.
Yeah.
So he would be a contemporary of people who contributed to the Mishnah. He'd be a Tanaim. in the Tanaic period. So, so I mean, that might be of interest. I read a book called Jesus the Pharisee about, I don't know, 20 years ago, which was
Yeah.
kind of interesting, and it talked about some of the things in the Talmud where some of the arguments he was making in the Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, I think, that were paralleled in the Talmud or something like he wasn't like this was not stuff he was these were not new ideas he was creating. He was participating in argument that already existed.
Yeah.
And if you want to find, I think it's out of print. I haven't seen one for a long time. But it's called Jesus the Pharisee, and
Yeah, I should
you
write
can
that
go look
down
at
and
that.
try and find it.
Yeah, so you might get something out of that. But getting off our rabbit trail because now we're halfway through the show, and we've only gotten just we haven't even started the second verse. So I'm going to get back and get us back on track. So in Bereshit Perek Aleph Pasuk Chet, or Genesis 1 verse 8, it says, "Vayikra Elokim l'rakia shemayim ve'erev ve'boker yom sheni." And God called the rakia heavens, and it was evening and it was morning, day 2,
Oh,
or the second day.
that's
The second
interesting.
day.
Yeah, that's interesting
What's
because
interesting?
with the version that from the Safari, it's saying
Safaria?
called the expanse sky, where yours is heaven, which is could be where you because I've heard with the word heaven it translate or is translated, it could either mean atmosphere, sky, or God's throne room. So, well, a sky,
Well, this is
space, or sky, space, or God's throne room. This obviously would
well, this
not
is
be referring to God's throne room.
this is the big discussion that the Ramban gets into here. Is what does this word Shemaim actually mean? Because the problem is, and so I'm glad you picked up on this issue. The problem is that we already used the term Shemaim at the very first verse. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." So here's the problem. Well, we already know it's called the heavens, so why is God naming it here? Excuse me. You see,
Yeah.
he's saying he called the expanse heaven. Wait a second. This is in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So what is the heavens is talking about there? Is the heavens at the beginning of Genesis, in the first verse,
I have to
the
say,
same with the heavens here? Hmm?
what in the heaven is he talking about?
Hey, what in the heaven? Yeah. What in the heavens is he talking about? Yes. You say with more desperation. What in the heavens is he talking about? You know,
I just
more
had to get the
feeling.
joke in there.
So the Ramban, I think it'll make it a little easier if I read directly what the Ramban says and then explain it. Because
Uh-huh.
I'm mostly right now going through the Ramban. I think it'll be a little bit faster. So it says, the Ramban says in his commentary, the heavens were already created on the first day. Why did God wait for the second day to name them? Okay, so he goes on. He called the heavens by this name on the second day when he invested the Hule with the form of the firmament. But what he's saying is that the Hule, Ashemaim, which is what we see in Genesis 1:1, that he calls Hule, right? He says he sees on day 2 that he invests it with the form of the firmament. So he's saying here this is where he's taking that potential. All Hule is potentiality, and then what we're dealing with right now is the realization of potential. So by giving it form.
Yeah.
Now, if you've ever taken any philosophy classes, some of this might sound very similar to the things you learned there. We start talking about form and causation and things like this. And I'll just remind everybody that at this time, Aristotelian philosophy was very popular, and it was very useful in explaining difficult concepts in Judaism. See, in Judaism, there are concepts that in part require a brilliant mind to understand because language is such it's a very simple, straightforward language but every word can have lots and lots of nuances.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. When it says that they cross over the Jordan, right? The Hebrew word there is ein, eight, resh, var, right? To cross over. However, it can be used in modern Hebrew and other situations to have certainly different nuanced meanings. So I was on the bus today. I was going into town, and it says Avarnu, right? Avarnu, and Avarnu means in Hebrew we moved. Okay, but literally in the basic root form, Avar means to cross over, and so Avraham was called Avram Ha'ivri because Avraham crossed over. He crossed over. Remember, he lived in
Kush.
Ur.
I was just saying where I thought he lived. I was thinking he lived in Kush, but
So he lived in Ur Kasdim, and which is like around Iraq, and he crossed over the Euphrates. So he's called Avram HaIvri because he crossed over that river. So Ivri means to cross over. So that became also a name for him. Well, that's one theory with what Ivri means is like the one who crossed over. So we can see that the same three-letter root word can have lots of different meanings, and they can have different nuances that can be used as a verb and as a noun, and those different the different shorish, the root,
yeah,
can be used sometimes to have meanings very similar and very different at the same time. Rambam covers a lot of this stuff when he goes in his Guide for the Perplexed. He talks about these. He categorizes these different terminologies, how different words functions as homophones and whatnot. Um, but so anyway, so unfortunately, so Hebrew is very what would you say? In some ways, it's a very elegant language in the sense that it can use a lot of the same word it can also be pregnant with lots of nuance. The problem is that in order for you to understand the nuance, you really have to be extremely intelligent and know what's going on. Sometimes the fact that we have so many new words introduced into the Latin and into the English and everything like that, it doesn't represent that we've gotten smarter. It just represents that we're trying to dice up the world a little bit more, and maybe we're
yeah,
not, our intelligence overall has not increased. The number of words have increased, so we can use more words to describe things, and so that we can start chipping away at these complex ideas a little bit better.
yeah,
And so I think that's when I talk about them using like Greek terminology, that was useful for them at that time. Just like there are some Jewish writers who will use modern scientific terminology to represent some of these ideas. And I've read where there are Kabbalists who use notions and theories of quantum physics to explain certain Kabbalistic or mystical ideas, right?
yeah,
And it's not that the meanings or whatever changed, that these ideas didn't already exist. It's just you had a very narrow audience who could understand them.
yeah,
And the closer we get, into the Messianic era, the more and more people who are able to understand these complex ideas. Because now we live with concepts that didn't used to exist. So I'll give you another example. I'm on my own rabbit trail now. So so I talked to you before about the miracle of Noah's Ark and
yeah,
how all the animals in the Ark, even though its capacity to hold those animals was limited, there was no way the Ark is big enough to contain all those animals. Well, thanks to science and science fiction, we have ideas that can explain that concept, such as relative dimensions. So one dimension, fitting inside another, like the TARDIS from Doctor Who, right?
yeah,
So the exterior of the TARDIS exists in one dimension, and the interior of the TARDIS exists in a second dimension. So the bigger room, the interior of the TARDIS can fit in a small little police box. And so that's a relative dimension. Well, this kind of terminology, relative and dimension, those words didn't exist at one point in history.
Yeah.
And so you could say the thing you could say about the size of the ark is you could say it's a nace, it's a miracle.
Yeah.
That was if you were just a simple regular person, that's really
Yeah.
all you could say about it. It's a miracle. But the
Yeah.
more our vocabulary grows, the more we can say about these things and understand, more people can understand it.
Yeah. Although I personally think it was the right size for everything, because I would think if with your, well, I'm not sure whether it's your theory or not that theory, but the inside being bigger than the outside, then why not just have Noah build something a lot smaller than something the size of a battleship?
Well, I'll tell you, the thing is that there are two maxims that God seems to operate under, according to the Jewish understanding. One is free will.
Yeah.
We want to protect the free will. And when we get to Exodus and we start dealing with the Pharaoh and talks about where God hardened the Pharaoh's heart,
Yeah.
okay, there's a debate between the Ramban and the Rambam. We talked about in the Who Are the Rabbis section, right?
Yeah.
They have different opinions on what it means that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. One says that it was to maintain his free will, and the other said it was to remove his free will. We'll get into that when we get to that section in Shemot. But I'm just saying all that for a particular reason, which now escapes me.
Something about the fact of what I said about the small one thing with Noah's Ark.
Oh, why is it so? Why not make it smaller?
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, why not make it bigger? Right? Why did God choose to make it the size that He made it? So one is to maintain free will, and the other was to make it something that Noah could participate in. God always wants human beings to participate in things that He's doing, and the best is whenever human beings and God do something together. So the building of the temple is one example where God allows His presence to dwell in the temple, but human beings had to build the temple under certain guidances. And so another example, we say every time we eat bread, we have a blessing that we say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. So you are Lord God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the ground. Now, if you're a thinking man, you ought to have a problem with that prayer, that blessing. You see the problem with the blessing?
No, because I think of the manna and the manna.
I said it too fast, probably. Yeah. Well, no, we say the end of the blessing is who brings forth bread from the ground.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I guess, like I said, I was thinking the manna in the desert, so that's what.
Well, the manna comes from the sky. The manna comes from the sky. Okay, but let me ask you a question.
They said about it being like bread from heaven, but it just appeared on the ground each morning.
Right, that's true. Well, I mean, apparently it fell on the ground or collected like dew, is the way it's described. But let me ask you this question though, Rick. Number one, we don't eat manna today.
Sure.
Right? When I eat bread, I'm making a blessing on that bread. Okay? Let me ask you a question. In Canada, can you tell me about approximately how many bread fields exist in Canada?
Bread fields? None. Lots of wheat fields.
None?
No.
What do you mean? No, there are no bread fields in Canada? Where do you get bread at then?
The store.
The store. And how does bread come into existence? There are bread fields. How does it come to existence?
By wheat broken up and a whole bunch of other things added to it to make it.
Right? We create flour, we bake it, we turn it into bread, right?
Yeah.
So you have to understand, number one, bread is like the superfood of the Bible. It's the only food in the Bible, in the Torah, that in it God says after you've eaten bread, you have to say a blessing after you're satisfied from eating. There's no other commandment making a blessing over any other food, only bread. So why is God so particular about bread? And my theory is, and I think probably others I don't think I'm the first to say this, but my theory is the reason why is because it takes God allowing the wheat to come up and human beings take the wheat that was brought up to turn the wheat into bread. And so maybe the reason that bread is so important, what is the most important food that we're commanded in the Torah to make a blessing over, is because it's a combination of God's will and our effort. And if that's the case, and we talk about the construction of the ark, then the ark should also be a reflection of God's blessing and man's effort. And so it had to be something that was impressive, but something that Noah and his sons could manage to build on their own.
Yeah.
So, which is the size that they had, and given the amount of time it took for them to make it. I think that's the answer of why it was that the size that it was. And I think that this is one of the big critiques a lot of atheists have for the story of Noah's flood, is that there's no way you can fit all the animals in there. But we can actually say, yeah, I mean, this is not a new problem.
Yeah.
Rabbis thousands of years ago, we already knew this problem. We already discussed this problem, right?
Yeah.
We said, well, the solution to the problem.
One solution Christians, well, maybe not just Christians, have come up with for it is, first of all, Noah probably would have taken baby animals or very young animals that, you don't need a full-size elephant. You take two, adolescent elephants, a male and a female. Sure. And they take a lot less space up than a full-grown elephant. And it's because with that, they can also reproduce more. You don't why take an older elephant, that can reproduce less. You want these things to be able to reproduce more and fill the world up again after the flood. So, a lot of Christians have said about that, with the smaller animals. And yeah, we got a few big animals, but, actually I think the world's full of more smaller animals. And we wouldn't have all the quote unquote species we have today, I'm not sure how many species of elephants there are, but, I only know of 2 offhand, but I'm sure there's probably a couple more. But I'm sure, elephants, if there's 4 or 5 species of elephants, they could have come out of, 2 unique elephants on, the ark, Because we go a lot by all the animals that we have today, like, would there really have been, 2 of each breed of dogs, 2 St. Bernards, 2 Chihuahuas, 2 whatever? No, there just would have been probably 2 dogs.
I think that even if you do all of that, you're still left with a number of animals that it's too many to put in the ark. If the flood was universal, then the number of animals, insects, everything, even if you reduce them down to one pair, you still wouldn't have enough room on the ark. And I think that's the counter argument for a lot of atheists. You still wouldn't have the room.
I think at the end of the only way to find out is to do it. Somebody do it. Build an ark. Actually, somebody sort of built the ark, an ark size thing, Ken Ham, but nobody's actually tried to fill it with the animals. He filled it with, a whole bunch of creation stuff, which is great and all that. But it'd be better to build. I'd like to see a zoo, sort of like it,
Sure.
But
I just don't. Knowing the plethora of creatures in the world, I just don't think that the ark, even if you cut corners and said, well, we're only taking one form of beetle, we're only taking one form of dog, we're only taking one form of, big game cat, right? All that, I still think you still have too many animals for the ark. But whether that's true or not, it's fine.
Yeah.
I think that as people who believe in God, here's the way you prioritize things. Number one, if you believe that God exists, and you believe that God created the universe and He created it from nothing, right? Then
nothing is
why do I have
impossible
to
for Him?
Right? Why do I have to make this argument? Why do I have to fit miracles into the boxes to be created by other people? Like at some point, I can just say, well, you know what? Maybe what happened was they got with the animals they could on the ark. everything died, and after they landed, God just snapped certain animals back into existence. Why couldn't that have happened as well?
Yeah.
Maybe the Torah didn't record it, but it couldn't happen. So I think that this becomes a game where people feel this pressure. I've got to explain everything.
Yeah.
And the Torah doesn't give you enough information to explain everything. And the
Yeah.
Torah isn't ultimately that interested in explaining how things happen. It's not really interested in giving you arguments to overcome people who disagree with you. Ultimately, it's interested in telling certain stories to communicate a certain message to help you to get some sort of, usually often a moral point, a point about human beings and what's important. So I think as long as we keep that in mind, there's no need to worry about this ultimately. And I think there's nothing wrong with us saying, well, it was a miracle.
Yeah.
That solves the whole debate.
Nothing wrong with that.
Right. But look, some of us are so intellectual that we really want to be able to give an intellectual answer to these types of challenges and questions. There's nothing wrong with that. I think you have to also be humble, though. You have to recognize to the extent you're able to answer questions. And at the same time, you should also recognize that there's nothing wrong with taking the position that there's a miracle. But if you want to go further into it, there is material to go further into it. Like I was saying, is that you can come up with scientific ideas or pseudoscientific ideas that give an explanation for how these things happen. But you don't have to use those things to explain it, because ultimately, the one who said, "Let there be light," can also let all the animals fit on the ark.
Yeah.
Let me get to verse 8 real quick so that we can at least do that before we finish.
Yeah. Rabbit trail. Big rabbit trail that was.
That's a huge one. That's right. So he called heavens by his name on the second day when it was okay. This name is to be explained as if it were vowelized with the I'm sorry. Here he goes into explaining the Shemaim. Actually, possibly two words, and the shin at the beginning is actually two shins. One shin is representative of I'm sorry, there's two mims. So the first two, Shemaim, the shin mim there is working. It means sham, there, and there's a second mim that means mayim, water. So it's like saying there's water. Okay, so the Rambam goes on and says, well, what's going on with this? Well, the sham mayim, the way that works is that sometimes if you have two of the same letters, and you want to put them together as one word, then you'll just write one of the letters one time, and you'll put a dot in the letter, and that's called I'm sorry, my brain went blank. You put that dot right there in the letter, and that represents there are two letters there. You see this a lot for the word like Vayomer. You look at that yud; it has a yud with a dot in it, and so it becomes Vi and Yomer. So it becomes two words like that. So it says, if you want to see an example of this, there is a person that we know of, right? His name is Jerubbaal. Is that how you Jerubbaal? Yerubbaal is the Yerubbaal is how you say it in Hebrew. Jerubbaal is how you say it in English. All right. So he says that that his name he is a combination of two words. Just trying to find the right place. I gotta stop slamming my table because it keeps making my thing squeak at me.
Okay, that's where the squeak is coming from. I'm like, am I hearing a bird? Where's the bird?
Right.
But do I get something open? That's making a bird sound.
Right. So Jerubbaal in Judges 6:32, right? His name is a contraction of two words, Yerav Baal, which means he quarrels with Baal. That's what his name means. His name literally means he quarreled with Baal, but they take those two words, right? Yerav Baal, they combine them. So Yerav ends with the letter Beit, and Baal begins with the letter Beit. What they do is instead of writing two-letter bait, they write one-letter bait, put a dot in it, and that becomes Jerubal, Jerubal in English.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he wants to, so that's the way that they want to explain that name and the Shemaim, how Shemaim works.
Yeah.
So here's where we end up coming from. Here's a simple explanation according to the Ramban, which is what Rashi says. According to the names Hashemayim for the heavens and Haaretz for the earth mentioned in the first verses are based on what they were to be called in the future. It is not so far-fetched to say this, for it is not possible to refer to them in any other way except with this terminology. Okay, but here's another approach. Here's another approach the Ramban suggests. But, however, it is more sound, according to the simple understanding of the verses, that we should say that the heavens mentioned in the first verse refers to the upper heavens, where you were talking about God's throne exists,
Yeah.
right? And that the heavens mentioned here, right, refer like to the waters, the heavens in the sky, basically.
Yeah.
So what I noticed, and this was my observation, I haven't read this in the commentary, but this sort of backs up what I'm saying. It's interesting that Genesis 1:1 has the word Hashemayim, the heavens. And here what we deal with in the rest is Shemayim, heavens.
Yeah.
And right? And whenever we talk about Shemayim, right, it seems like that's where it seems like you have things like the sun and the moon and the stars, and that seems very different than Hashemayim. So I think that what the Ramban is saying here is that the difference in names, the names, although they're the same, they have two different meanings.
Yeah.
One has the meaning of the upper heavens, the other one has the meaning of that the normal heavens, the non-divine heavens, if you will. So that's how I would sort of take that. And I don't get too far into this because he really gets into some higher concepts here. But I think that's more than enough as far as Pasuk 8 or chapter verse 8.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions in the last 3 minutes of our class?
I don't think so. Wow, we didn't go down too many rabbit trails, but one of the ones we did was really big.
It was a very deep rabbit hole, the one we went down. Well, some of these are concepts and ideas that it's good to get through. That the one thing I want us to make sure that we pay attention to is these concepts of making that we see from verse 1 forward, because they have impact on how we understand the creation account.
Yeah.
And it becomes very important when we get to the creation of human beings, because there is something I want to tackle. There's something I want us to tackle, which is a problem, I think, that we have a secular accusation that Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are two separate creation accounts, and they contradict one another. And so what I want us to do is pay attention to these creation words, making and forming and saying and creating from nothing. I want us to pay very close attention to those so that we can solve this issue and see that if we can come away with an understanding of these terms, so that we're no longer bothered by the accusation that there are two creation accounts that are in contradiction.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm really trying to go with some of this stuff. And so that's why I want to point out that so far we have had the notion of bara, creating from nothing, vayomer, using your words to create, and then you have asa, which means make, which means to take things that are already available and to combine them into something new, and then vayihi, which means it's so. And that is also that's also sort of a creation term. So we're going to see this throughout this first chapter, And it's going to become important when we ask the question, is there a contradiction between the two creation
Yeah.
accounts?
As
Or are they the same thing?
one thing I've heard from people, the Christian creationists, is that they're basically one is a very overview, which is sort of God, which is the first one, and the second is a little bit more detailed, especially on the creation of man in the second account, which is more was supposed to have been Adam's account of how things went.
Sure.
You know,
I don't think there's a contradiction between that. I think that is also part of solving that apparent
yeah,
contradiction.
yeah,
I
and
think
that wouldn't be
that's
a contradiction. That's just a matter of perspective, shall we say?
right. Right. But what I hope to do for us though is
Yeah,
to take it and understand that chapter 2 is a continuation of chapter 1.
yeah,
That's where and not just that it's from different perspectives, but that ultimately um, uh, the different perspectives are actually talking about um, the creation of different things from one another,
yeah,
and that's what we're going to see. And I don't want to give it away because I'm very excited about this, and I really want us to get there as quickly as possible. It's going to take us forever, apparently, to get that
yeah. We're
far.
going like what
However,
we're going two verses at a time.
we're going like 2 verses. Yeah, I mean that's better than the first time we did like one verse. So now we've got up to 2 verses. I'm sure it'll speed up at some point. It's just there are a lot of interesting points to be made. Well, look,
Yeah, yeah.
hey
Especially
Rick,
as you're
that's
going
it
through
for us.
especially as you're going through the day by day thing. I think,
Yeah,
like you said, it's sort of important going into these nuances of different things for especially the day by day account of creation and what he's creating, how, what, where, why, when. Doing the journalistic thing almost. Answering
right,
the four what is it four W's the 1 H, who, what, where, why, when, how.
right,
And I think I missed
hmm
one there, but people get the point.
right, right. I think I talked about that the first. That's what I have my kids do when they learn Torah. Is we answer those questions sometimes. But look, my hope is that when somebody comes away after having learned this together with us, that I remember being in college and I remember being challenged in my science classes. I took a evolutionary anthropology class, and I took various things here and there that were very challenging to what I believed. And so these were questions that I wanted to answer. And so I've tried to come with some answers. I've used the commentaries. I've tried to use just simple Peshat approach to understanding what the text says, and I think that there's some value in that learning and what the commentators have to say. And if I can present that, and that relieves a burden of somebody who
Yeah,
is really struggling is from a faith standpoint and believing in God, I want to remove that burden for them so they can feel the freedom to believe in God
yeah,
but not feel like they're an idiot. Like, because I
yeah,
think sometimes the way that British people get painted is that we're idiots for believing in God because all this stuff is so obviously false. And
yeah,
so here I want to show that you know
yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
you
It
know
takes a lot more faith and really to believe in evolution, and the universe just came from nothing, and although there's all this intelligence behind it, that there's really no intelligence. That there's no
it
purpose
depends on your
to.
starting point. It
Uh,
depends on your starting point, Rick. If your starting point is that all phenomena, all things that happen in the world have natural explanations, then it doesn't take any faith at all to believe in chance evolution. It makes a lot of sense. It's a very reasonable standpoint.
yeah,
But if
but
your starting point,
just the fact of non-life going from life going from non-life to life, you know, it does take a lot of faith to believe that because there's no real evidence to back it up yet. Yeah, and everything's got design in it. Even atheists like what the guru of atheists lately. Richard Dawkins, he's like, oh, it just appears to be designed. Like, okay,
as appears
either
in
it
design.
is designed. How can something appear to be designed without being designed?
But here's what I'm saying, and this is what I
Yeah.
would keep in mind. I feel like when people get into discussions about science versus religion,
Yeah.
I feel like I feel like both sides force them to take a position
Yeah.
where science and religion are contradicting one another, and that you either have to see things from the scientific point of view or
Yeah.
from the religious point of view. And each side is an idiot if they don't see it from my side.
Yeah.
What I would argue, however, is that it's a non-starter. The whole argument is a non-starter. I
Yeah.
think that let's appreciate their perspective, and then we can look at our own perspective. We can see the assumptions we're making, see
Yeah.
the assumptions they're making. Because look, the assumptions they make is that everything has a natural explanation, and that
Yeah.
if I look hard enough, eventually I'm going to find the answer. So even though maybe chance evolution is not the explanation, like even within chance evolution, they have concepts of what's the word? Older I get, I just turned 46 today, so my brain is slowing down and leaking information. It's leaking information the older I get, but it's sort of like almost directed. There almost seems like there's a direction in evolution, and atheist scientists point this out. So why aren't they believing in God? Well, it's because they have a systematic approach to it that allows them to make the explanation. But even if that current explanation doesn't work out in the end, they believe they'll come up with a better explanation later on. That's faith based on evidence. They have the evidence that we used to not know anything. Over the course of 1,000 years, we've come so far that now we can blow up the world if we need to with nuclear bombs, right? That's how we've advanced our minds. On the other side, for those of us who believe in God, our starting point is already God exists. The world is the result of a miracle, and there's more
Yeah.
to the world than just the physical reality.
Yeah.
There's more to the world than natural law. Natural law has an origin. So for us, it seems absolutely absurd
Yeah.
to look at the world and see all the design in it and say, well, no, this is all chance. Well, wait, there's design. But the point is that both sides make assumptions that in one way prevents them from seeing the other person's opinion,
Yeah.
the other person's perspective. If we can get past that, then we don't have to feel so constrained to reject things that we have no reason to reject.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's my perspective.
I think we as Christian, well, we as Genesis believers, God
Sure.
believers, we make one assumption. We
Palestinians,
make one assumption: God exists.
yeah.
They make I don't know how many assumptions.
They make one assumption. Like, look, it's their axiom. We each have one axiom. Our axiom is God exists. Their axiom, as far as I can tell, is that everything that exists has an explanation within nature. And so the more we examine nature, the clearer our understanding of why things work the way they do will
Yeah,
become.
but with
And
that
this is
one,
the
sorry, but with that one
good.
assumption that it has a natural explanation to it, it leads to them making so many other assumptions about different things.
But us making the assumption that God exists leads us to making so many different assumptions about other things as well. Like, for example, we assume miracles exist.
Yeah, I guess.
That's an assumption based on our belief in God. So they don't believe miracles exist. That's a result of their belief that everything has a natural explanation. So what I'm saying is
Yeah,
that whatever your starting point is, there is a rational process that leads you to whatever number of conclusions you have.
yeah,
And the question is worth fighting. And if you're dealing with your own internal doubt, right? The worst thing you can do is go easy on yourself and hard on the other guy. The best thing you can do is say, okay, let me answer this question to the best of my ability. Now, I would say this cautiously. Not everybody is suited for philosophical exploration of deep and difficult issues. It's just not true that everybody can come to a difficult issue and be able to think through it properly. I have a limit to what I can think through.
Yeah.
Right? I have a limit to things like, look, I got a degree in philosophy. That doesn't mean I can understand any philosophy that's out there. It means that I have a certain level of comprehension and understanding in philosophy.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of it that goes way beyond my ability to understand it. And I have to understand things to the point that I can understand it. So everybody has to really understand themselves and say, okay, what is, let's take for example this whole COVID issue, right?
Yeah.
You've got a bunch of non-scientists arguing with each other whether or not COVID is an issue, based on non-scientific backgrounds, quoting people with scientific credentials. And so the arguments we make are an argument from authority. We say this person is a scientist. He has a certain level of knowledge, and therefore he's an authority, and therefore whatever he says must be true.
Yeah.
That's a fallacy, and that's a fallacy in logic. So we have to recognize that in the debate, like I've known people who are ending relationships with family members over the whole COVID vaccination thing. Why are you doing that? That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
That's your family. That's your family. Like, right or wrong, at some point you've got to say that that's family, and they're acting based on the information they have, based on the people they trust, and they're drawing the conclusions based on that.
Yeah.
And find a different solution other than ending relationships. Don't end a relationship. Because a lot of people are in these relationships not because they really know what they're talking about, because everybody wants to be right. And they think they have the better expert. And because, an arrogance, right? Like a guy with like an arrogance.
Yeah.
And so we all have to work on being humble. And I was learning, I think it was this weekend with the Parsha Mishpatim. And that was that when you see somebody getting angry, right? Anger is a sign that someone has a certain level of arrogance within them. And that when they get angry, right, it's very rare. We only have one example of somebody who got angry for the right reason. And that's Pinchas. I don't know, how do you say it in English? Pinchas, Pinchas, Aaron's grandson, Pinchas.
Okay.
Pinchas. So I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. So we only have that one example, but any other time where you see anger, usually it's an issue of gaiva, of like arrogance. And so, so when people are yelling and getting angry with each other, it's not always because they're right or they have the better arguments, because there's a certain arrogance, or I think the other aspect is there's a certain fear. I think if we can just come together, recognize our limitations in any discussion, then I think that we can talk to each other like people.
Yeah.
Talk to each other like people. Like, look at you and I. You and I have very different theological commitments.
Yeah.
Right? I do not believe what you believe, and you do not believe what I believe at the end of the day. That doesn't mean you and I can't get along. You and I get along very well. We have a nice conversation, right?
Yeah.
And we can learn from each other. It's not a problem.
Yeah, for sure.
And I can disagree with you. You don't get offended, right? And and you can just disagree with me, and I don't get offended, right? And that's the way. That's why I feel like all conversations should be.
Yeah.
Right. Just do your best to understand the other person.
Yeah.
If you don't understand them, just recognize it. I don't know. Like some of the wisest men and women I've ever known have been people who say, you know what, I don't know. And those people live very happy lives because they recognize I don't know. They don't need this pressure and stress of having answers to everything.
Yeah. Hey, a lot of times I might come up with a theory, but I'll say at the end of the day, I don't know. This is my theory, but I don't know for sure.
Right. Exactly.
If you can convince me of another theory, you're welcome to try, but, I'm not going to say I'm going to agree with you. You better have some convincing arguments.
There you go. Right. Well, because you'd be foolish otherwise. You'd be flip-flopping on things.
Yeah.
Right. If you weren't willing to commit to a position, then it just means that that you really aren't. Maybe you don't know anything, which is, I mean, fine. You don't know anything, but I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
be fair to yourself and be fair to others. Like, don't insist someone's wrong when you can't answer their objections or questions. At the same time, don't feel like you have to then go along with what they believe.
Yeah.
Try to, I mean, it's. But I'm also saying, don't. Also, I'm not trying to say just take whatever you believe and believe it no matter what. Like, if you've got questions and you see objections and you want
Yeah.
to change your position, you can do that. But I'm just saying that do it for the right reasons, not for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
That is the end of my soapbox and my preaching for now. And this is a very interesting ending. We haven't really had this discussion yet, which is interesting. But I'm glad we have it. I think it's fun. And I'm going to say goodnight because
Yeah.
I have a birthday date with my wife. We're going to watch a movie, have some fun. Uh, talking about how glorious and amazing I am. These 46 years of universal improvement due to my existence will be celebrated this evening. So anyway, I was talking about arrogance. Now I get to, I can put that out there. But
Yeah.
anyway, so I hope you have a great rest of the evening, Rick, and
Well,
anybody who might be watching.
I hope you have a
So,
great rest of your birthday. Happy birthday. Happy birthday to
my birthday.
you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to hello. Happy birthday to you.
Yom yom halal, yom yom halal. Right. So we have a Jewish one. Anyway, okay. Well, I'll see you guys next week, and had a lot of fun, and we'll pick up with Genesis 1:9 next week.
Cool.
Right. I stopped the streaming.
Wow. There we got 2 verses done. 7 and 8. Man, we're going slow. But slow is good because we are learning a lot. Hopefully, everybody out there. It's interesting going along like this. I think going a couple verses at a time. Things might speed up later because um, you know not things aren't quite as in depth. It just seems these first few verses there's a lot there. So like you said, you've been enjoying this, and come back next week for another thing of Old Testament study with Hillel and Rick. Although his channel it's like Genesis study or I forget the word for Genesis in Hebrew. They don't really call it Genesis. They call it something slightly different, as you've heard a few sessions ago. Okay, so again, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time.